So excited to be here with you all again. This is part two or round two at our attempt to do this accountability and pressure workshop. So we're really, really excited to be able to have you all here. And if you're here, you care a lot about community, and I'm so excited to hear more about the partnership between Fair Count and SEEP, because the way that we are going to be able to move the needle forward, particularly for the betterment of our communities and our people, is through solid partnership. And so SEEP always shows us, what real partnership actually looks like, and Fair Count is doing an amazing job. So good to hear about that. So today, y'all, we're going to talk about spanks and thanks. And I know that is a really curt way to talk about, pressure and accountability, but it's a way for you all to think about what you are doing to utilize these types of tools that are in your arsenal. This workshop in particular is a supplement to People First, the integrative guide to nonprofit civic engagement in a post-pandemic South that myself and my team member, Ebony Charday, who's my project coordinator in our civic engagement work that we helped develop for SEEP. So if you all, I'm not going to cover too many things that are part of, that are within the guide, but we'll touch on a few of those things. But particularly, we're going to talk a little bit about what actually accountability is and that those pressure campaigns. So we want to start every workshop that we do where we talk about relationships, because relationships, as we know, if you are doing any type of civic engagement in the South, relationships always come first. That is a direct quote from one of our North Carolina South Strong partners, and really speaks to what you use as a foundation for your civic engagement work. And that foundation is your relationships. But we want to talk a little bit about why we're here and why this work is so important. Pressure and accountability campaigns and those programs should be as much of a part of your advocacy program as the advocacy that you're doing itself. So we'll talk about a few different ways that we can hold our elected officials accountable in a safe way as C3s, right? Because no one wants to end up behind bars. So I'm going to start off with, what are some of the legislative session start dates? And some sessions have already ended. I know particularly in Virginia, I think they've already ended by February 27th, if I'm not mistaken. But a number of the target states that are part of the SEEP and the South Strong Network, these are the dates that they've started. I know here in Georgia particularly, our session ends March 31st. And so we have 40 legislative days. So there's still a good amount of time for work to be done legislatively, for some advocacy to be done at the state capitol. And that's what we're here to talk about. So hopefully we're catching you right as you are kind of thinking about what those look like as you're putting together your pressure campaigns, or you may have already developed one. And then what does accountability look like on the tail end of that once those sessions end? So can C3s actually participate in accountability programs? Yes. Usually this type of work is considered political activity. And so we know that we can't participate in political activity, but as long as your activities do not cross over into supporting or opposing the re-election of any elected official, your accountability work is compliant. So your nonpartisan activity does not mean non-participation. I want to repeat, nonpartisan does not mean non-participation. So you can still participate in the legislative process. You can still develop a strong program as long as you are doing it in the right way. So we want to talk a little bit about the two types of lobbying that there are. First is your direct lobbying. As C3 organizations, direct lobbying is the attempt to influence a legislative body through communication with a member or employee of a legislative body or with a government official who participates in formulating that legislation. So these folks are typically considered under the code, particularly under C3 codes, as covered officials. So they generally include your legislative branch officials, any members of Congress, their staff, committee staff, executive branch officials, including the president, White House, and administrative staff as well. And then grassroots. Grassroots lobbying is the attempt to influence legislation by attempting to affect the opinion of the public with respect to the legislation that you all are that you'll be working on, and encouraging the audience to take action with respect to that particular piece of legislation. So we'll talk about a few examples of what grassroots lobbying look like as we move through our through today's presentation, but just wanted to outline what the two types of lobbying are, particularly as it relates to nonprofit work. So depending on the type of reporting of lobbying expenses your organization has selected, you may need to separately report those direct lobbying activities and your grassroots lobbying activities. So when you're building your pressure and accountability into your advocacy program, you want to make sure that it is complementing your legislative priorities. This is really for the benefit of strengthening the impact of your work. You want to be able to show elected officials that you mean business and that you are going to call them out on particular things that do not pass, if measures are pretty egregious, if there are some things that they're doing a really good job at. You want to make sure that you are keeping everyone abreast of kind of what's going on with that piece of legislation as well. But it is a really good idea for you to build these pressure tactics and accountability into your programs. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So some pressure tactics you can employ, thank and spank. You want to celebrate what they're doing right and call out what they aren't doing so well. And so you can do this in a variety of ways, whether you're doing this via social media, whether you're doing this in different venues. You want to make sure that you are employing these types of tactics to let them know that we are watching. And so that's exactly what this is. Pressure and accountability is all about being the watchdog, and like you are accountable to the organizations and to the people that you service most. So you encourage the supporters to thank legislators who voted favorably on a measure and criticize those who did not. But this is widely employed on social media and other venues, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Also use the media. The media in this regard, everyone, is your friend. Do not be afraid to use the media, whether you are going to hold a press conference, whether you're going to send some press releases or media advisories. Develop some talking points. I mean, the good thing about the type of work that you do is that because you are the expert in your work and you work directly with the people, you can develop talking points about how a particular measure affects your community most directly. And you want to release statements while the issue is still kind of within the legislative process too. So when you're thinking about, how do you enhance your impact, develop those talking points, really let people know that, myself, along with a coalition of maybe other partners, or you do some of that, that partnership that we saw earlier with SEEP and Fair Count, make sure that you're doing that as well. With folks who have like issues, host a press conference together to talk about how this issue most deeply affects the communities that you serve. And host and or call for town hall meetings. So whether you host your own town hall meeting or you ask for a legislator or city official or whoever to host their own town hall, this is really an opportunity for them to speak to the public about the issues, and for them to really share with the community about what is going on within the process of this issue, where the issue is within the process. What do they think about the issue? This is an opportunity for you to get public comment, for you to open up testimony, for you to invite the community to speak, and for the legislator or legislators or committee, in some respects, for them to listen to the community as well. Some of these tactics are also mentioned in the guide too. So I strongly encourage you all, if you haven't seen the civic engagement guide, please take a look at the area that's called Be a Tattletale. So again, some pressure tactics as you can employ: host a rally. Well, you host a rally to invite concerned citizens to bring awareness to an issue. I encourage you all, if you haven't hosted a rally, to do it. It's literally it's a low lift because you already have a group of people that care very deeply about an issue. Going ahead and tell them we're going to host this rally at this particular place at this particular time. We are going to rally in opposition or in support of this thing. When I drive down the street most days, living in Atlanta, I drive down Memorial Drive and I see that there are still Black Lives Matter supporters that are outside. And so they're usually on the corner. You can honk, you can wave at them. They have like a whole like setup on the corner. If you're familiar with Atlanta, it's on the corner of Memorial and Boulevard. It is fantastic. So, and there's also protests that happen outside of the state capitol as well. We'll talk a little bit about some of the voting rights legislation that's been kind of fast tracked through the legislature here in Georgia. But that was a time where we had a lot of rallies as well. And particularly this picture is one of those pictures around that rally. So if you're hosting a march, if you're hosting a rally, you want to make sure that you have all of your paperwork from the city available, that you've reserved the space. I know particularly here in Georgia, we have Liberty Plaza. It's free and open for folks for them to have demonstrations there. But if you're doing anything else, maybe on the Capitol steps, on your City Hall steps, you may want to work with a city council member, or you may just call the City Hall directly to see if you can get that place reserved. But you always want to show proof that you are legally, you were supposed to be there, that you have the documentation that you can be there, and that you are in no way attempting to disrupt any kind of business as usual that is happening in those places that you're doing your march. Sometimes if you're doing a march, you may want to get like a police escort. You may want to, work with the city to ensure that you have all of your route kind of mapped out. But it's good to put out your flyers, to make sure that you're working with other organizations so they can reach out to the community members. Do robocalls and inviting community members to come out to your rallies and to your marches. Do email blasts. Make sure you're doing text messages. I mean, grassroots campaigns are grassroots. And the way that you can encourage and increase the participation in a particular rally, because if there's an organization, much like the NAACP or other organizations that do really, really great work, they have a base of supporters that follow them. And then they also have their people who also follow them as well. So make sure you're reaching out in all of the mediums that you're listed on, whether it's social media, but make sure you're employing all of these tactics too. We talk about texting campaigns. We talk about pass-through campaigns. We talk about all of these things within the guide, but you can actually use these things as a recruitment tool as well as you're thinking about your hosting either your rally or your march. So some other pressure tactics that you can employ: pull up. That's what the young people say these days. But I think we know what this looks like best. When Jenny and I, in our former lives, when we were working in the office of former House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams, we had a number of constituents pull up to the office. And that's one of the best ways to get the attention of your legislator, to really talk about whatever the issue is. You want to be able to pull up and or probably see them in a public forum. So if you know that they're going to be somewhere, you know that they are participating in some type of public forum, that may be your opportunity to really ask a question and then make public their response as well. So sometimes this is usually like a last resort kind of thing. If folks usually hadn't gotten a response, if there's been kind of dead air from the legislator or even from their office, then serious advocates will pull up. And so I also encourage you, if you haven't received a response, some of the best ways to do it, and particularly now I know COVID has made it very difficult for you to advocate, and it's a little more difficult to advocate online. You may still have to go to that person's office, or you may still have to go to the state capitol in order to get some type of response or to share a concern that you have about a particular issue within your organization too. Pick up the phone, y'all. Pick up the phone. We can't say this enough. I am a big fan of cold calling, but particularly pick up the phone and utilize patch through programs, utilize texting campaigns, do phone banking. These are great ways to increase your civic participation within your constituency, but to also let your legislators know that you are paying attention and that you are going to have those folks call through to those offices to advocate on whatever the issue is. The way patch through campaigns and phones work is there's a live person on one end, and then you're calling through to the community, and then you're patching the community member through to the office. And this is not just a tactic that you can use for advocacy, right? You can also use it if you were trying to connect a community member to a service provider as well. So that's another way that you can use your patch through dialing campaign. Also, share your legislative priorities. Share with the public and with your membership or your supporters what your legislative priorities even are. You may not know all of the bills that are going to be dropped in a session, but you do know what your issue is. You always know your issue, and you always know your mission. And so you can say to the public, we are always going to be looking for issues as it relates to, if your organization focuses on puppies, we are always going to look for legislation surrounding the treatment and handling of puppies in our state. Also, utilize the power of storytelling. We will continue to develop what the storytelling is going to look like for you all as well. But uplift the story of someone who probably is unable to uplift their own story. You are a venue, you have a following, you also have influence. And so if that person is or has been affected by a policy, whether positively or negatively, you want to make sure that you can pull at the heartstrings of legislators and of the general public by sharing that person's story. I tell you, the power of storytelling is actually very real. People's stories move policy, and they also move people. So always in as many ways as you can, share a person's individual story, whether you're doing that via social media, whether you're sharing a video of them, whether you have that person share like an op-ed or draft a story about their own story. Make sure that you're sharing that story. But when we're thinking about accountability, we want to be as creative as we can be. And so think about the ways that you can tell the story of impact in a very creative way that is going to catch someone's attention, whether it's the public or it's the legislative body. This could be through art, music, whatever the venue may be. Maybe you're doing like an installation somewhere. But think about if you're doing a mural, think about a way that you can actually tell a compelling story and talk about the impact of a particular issue in a way that will get people to listen. Share legislative records. This is something that I think has a really, really deep impact as well. Now, because you all aren't C4s, and maybe some of you on this call are, but share legislative records. List all legislative votes on a broad range of issues that were voted on. This is a compliant way for you to be able to share that information. You can mail that out. You can post this on your social media, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the case may be. And it needs to be shared in a way that does not consider a measure good or bad, but that you are just sharing that this is all public information. We are just putting this in a form and in a venue for you to actually be able to read it. Now, if you are sharing this information with your organization's members, you can more focus your attention on those targeted issues, and you may include those good or bad designations as well. Also, y'all can request governmental oversight too. When I think about kind of how these bills in the legislature, particularly these voting bills, have fast-tracked their way, like almost bulldozed their way through the legislature, you can ask for the legislative committee to use their investigative power to really dig deep into an issue. So maybe you think, you all haven't focused on this issue enough. Maybe you believe that there isn't enough transparency in the process. It is your job as advocates to be able to share whatever you believe information has been left out to the general public for you to request those things be put out in a form that is actually easily accessible for people to understand, for so that it's accessible, and so that everyone knows how the process is transforming this piece of policy or legislation. So you can certainly ask for that as well. But what you are essentially doing here is creating a record of activity. Through all of the tactics that you're employing, you are speaking on an issue, and the way in which you speak on this issue indicates that your communication on this is not political activity, because this is something that you talk about all the time. This is not just a political thing. Even though this may be a hot button issue at the time, you are always advocating on these particular issues of a civic nature all the time. So you want to make sure that you are developing this record of activity, that you are working with these legislators, that you are posting information about educational information to constituents about what's happening at your legislature, or at City Hall, even at the county commissioner's office. You want to make sure that you are developing this line of communication so everyone knows that we have a record of talking about these things pretty frequently. So let's talk about an example of accountability. This is an example that is in Boulder Advocacy's accountability and advocacy kind of one pager. And I'll share this information with you all in the follow-up. But they have a Save the Puppies Education Fund. They work to end the sale of puppies that are bred in puppy mills. So they've administered surveys to really glean from the public if this is something that they actually care about. And the public also didn't know that there was a bill that was moving through the legislature to ban the sale of puppy mill dogs. The Save the Puppies Education Fund engaged in ad campaigns, community involvement that held legislators accountable for their inaction through education and advocacy. So we'll talk a little bit more about how they actually employed that. So their education ad campaign recognized that there was a need to educate the public and legislators about what the puppy mill issue actually was. So they developed an advertising campaign that highlighted the health problems of those puppy mill dogs. Then they ran ads on social media and in local newspapers and posted flyers around the city. So that's how they actually developed their ad campaign, which was steeped in education. Moving into community involvement, they tabled at community events, encouraged members of the public to sign a petition to urge the legislature to pass that bill. And then they tracked the cost of their signature gathering as grassroots lobbying expense. That's the key, y'all. They tracked the cost of their signature gathering as the grassroots lobbying expense. Save the Puppies Education Fund regularly updated its list of supporters on the bill's progress in the legislature and the actions that were taken by those legislators. But they didn't just stop there. I think I'm out of, hold on, y'all. Well, I had another slide. They didn't just stop there. So they also hosted forums. They also hosted forums with other community partners to, and this was an election year, so they also hosted forums on a number of different issues to talk about specifically this puppy mill issue. At that point, they've already raised the awareness on the issue. They've introduced the issue to legislators and to potential candidates who hopefully in the future will vote in support of passing that bill. So that's how their education, or this example of this education campaign went. But we'll actually see what this looks like in real action. So here in Georgia, there are two omnibus bills around voting. These bills are limiting access to voting, the convenience and the equity on Georgia's most vulnerable population. It's cutting early and weekend voting, as you can see in this GIF here, disenfranchising election day voters, to some degree restricting vote by mail, who can actually send that mail out. Literally, since the state's demographics have changed so much, there have been progressive wins in Georgia that helped elect the president of the United States and offer 2 Senate seats that We're assuming that Georgia's GOP were so upset with that and were unable to find any fraud that their response was to just completely dismantle voting rights altogether. So both of those bills have fast-tracked their way through the House and the Senate in Georgia's legislature. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of our organizations here in Georgia are doing to help provide awareness around this issue. So the Let GA Vote campaign, as you can see here, and some of the partners that are here on the bottom, particularly Georgia Stand Up, who is, I think, a South Strong partner, they did an ad campaign. This ad was placed in today's Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where they are calling direct attention to the issue and putting pressure on the business community. This coalition of nonprofits developed an ad campaign to highlight the history of fighting for and protecting the right to vote. And this is also being accompanied by phone banks to those companies as well. So really powerful image here at the top with our late Congressman John Lewis being faced against the police here. Really strong messaging, as well as a list of those companies that are listed below. And then you can see all of the organizations that partnered at the bottom. They hosted rallies. So the group also hosted rallies on to call on legislators to actually stop these measures. So this is Reverend James Woodall, who was the president of the Georgia NAACP, who is speaking against House Bill 531, Senate Bill 241. Press were invited. Organizations really got great coverage after this rally. It was very, very well attended. And as the speakers kept falling in, we also had legislators come and speak. It was a fantastic showing of who actually cares about this issue, why the issue matters, and then what grassroots advocacy actually looks like here on the ground. About a week later, I would say about a couple of days later, because this was sometime last week, a couple of days ago, there was a protest outside of the Capitol for those who were in opposition and those who were for or who were in support of the legislation. Those protests got really interesting outside of the Capitol. Then you have to get the creatives involved too, right? So with this campaign, artists came together and they developed shareable GIFs and memes to ensure that the culture, because everything around politics and policy also is deeply embedded in culture as well. So these GIFs here, the meme here on the left, is a way to really share with folks so they can share with their own people, what's going on at the Capitol. How do you reach out to diverse communities? You want to make sure that you have a space for everyone to be able to have a say-so in whatever you're advocating for as well. And by utilizing social media too. So nonprofits also use their social media platforms to share information. They continue to put pressure on Georgia-based campaigns. So Fair Fight here is a C4, but I wanted to highlight what they are doing. And again, this is all primary purpose information. None of this is to influence an election. None of this is all really what C3s and C4s can do together. So what they're sharing is that this particular bill would cost Georgia counties and taxpayers almost $53 million in the next election cycle alone. When we're looking at New Georgia Project here on the left, who is a C3, they do a really good job of embedding culture and reaching out to a specific group of target population that they have, which is usually more Black and brown voters, as well as younger folks as well. So you don't see the GIF here, but Georgia corporations, when it's convenient, Black Lives Matter. But then when Georgia corporations, when Black voters are under attack, it was a meme of someone, bowing, almost like and scene. So, so that was the gift that they used. But this is an excellent way for them to show just how they're going to share their information. And then they're actually adding, they're not blind copying, they're actually adding these corporations as well. Well, it's good to know kind of where your organization's sweet spot is, right? Like if you're more of a policy-based organization, then sure, it's more education. If you're more grassroots, then it may be a little bit more pressure. But I think what we've seen, particularly even here in Georgia with the voting rights stuff, like there are groups that sit on one side or the other, even though they're aligned in their mission. Their tactics and the way that they approach the work is a little bit different, because they may not be as policy centric, but they may be more grassroots oriented. And so it's important to know kind of, okay, if I'm going to handle the research and legislative kind of work, then you all can handle like the grassroots education piece. And then if you all maybe marry in a C4, then they can take care of your lobbying too. I think the last thing that we'll just kind of close with is always make sure in all of your advocacy and your in all of your work that you're doing, consult a lawyer. Make sure you're talking to a lawyer and get it all approved first, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're inadvertently breaking the rules. You didn't know or seem like you were being less prescriptive around lobbying when you actually probably were. So it's always good to just get some eyes on it, and think about, how are you going to move forward, and your lawyer will help you kind of develop a less maybe a less political way so you can do the things that you may need to do depending on your status, your IRS status. So I hope this was helpful to you all. We'll make sure that the presentation is available for you all to kind of take a look back at and think about some of your future tactics. But I hope you all strongly consider using pressure tactics and accountability tactics in your future work within your organization. So that's all I got for you. Thank you. Thank you, of course, to SEAP, and thank you all for being so attentive and for listening and thinking about unique ways that we can continue to get this work done.